Hello, everyone. This is the IOM podcast, and today we're talking about pornography. This is an exploration into my personal story with pornography. It's not a moralistic or not preaching about pornography. I'm not saying if it's right or wrong in like a ultimate sense, but I believe my journey has some jewels for people because I've explored it a lot through a psychological, meditative, and curious lens. And I know this is a topic at hand. No pun intended for a lot of people. And there's a lot of struggle around it. There's a lot of questions around it. So let's start off in the beginning. And I know I've talked about this twice in the podcast already. And let's go there again. I discovered masturbation when I was a young child. And I intuitively just started dry humping the bed. Started dry humping the bed and realized magic comes out. It feels good. And that began a pattern. It began at such a young age, I can say this was a unconscious pattern that I had moved into a habit pattern. And from there, it just built over time. It became a nightly ritual. I didn't grow up with porn because I discovered it at a young age and there wasn't the internet that I had access to and I just didn't have access. So I remember watching things when I started growing up, kind of the early teen years. And one of the things that I discovered was DVDs with slightly sexual scenes. So there might be like somebody making out and this would turn me on a little bit. So what I would do is I would take that DVD to my room and put it in the DVD player, or when no one's around, I would hide at night. And I would watch that scene and I would play it when it was over, because it was usually like 10 or 20 seconds. I'd pause it and then I'd rewind it and I'd watch it over and I'd gain some kind of sexual stimulation out of this. One of the movies that we had that I really enjoyed was The Family Man. And I feel like I was a little bit young to enjoy The Family Man in the way that I did. Maybe it was a hearkening to a desire to have a family. It's a very sweet story about a man who, Nicolas Cage, that's that man, who's living a beautiful life. He's a businessman. He thinks he has everything he needs. And then he gets this opportunity to see what his life might have been if he had fallen in love with a woman that he left earlier in his life and had quite a simple life. Not a rich life, not being a successful businessman, but having children and having love. And this heartwarming story had a little sex scene, like a little making out. And I was attracted to the woman, not Nicolas Cage. And I would play and pause that scene and just get a little sexual stimulation from it. Looking back now, I can say that I grew up masturbating to Nicolas Cage inadvertently. So once I did have the internet, I found porn quite quickly. And this began another habit pattern of pairing the mental and visual stimulation with the physical act of masturbation. And because I did this at a very early age, unconsciously, and this habit pattern grew, it's a very unconscious habit pattern. And the thing with patterns is they're either increasing our level of freedom and leading us towards our love and our highest path and our dreams. Otherwise, they're spiraling in a different direction, and one bad decision leads to another. And this is what is known as the downward spiral. So an unregulated, unconscious sexual act over many years deeply ingrained habit patterns of desire, and it became a place in my life where my unhealthy tendencies had room to express in my solitude. What does that mean? It means that I had certain desires for women, objectifications. I wanted to use sexual stimulation. At an early age, I became quite addicted to not only masturbation, but sexuality. And these unhealthy relationships I was having with women were expressed in many ways. And the porn was this place where I could go into my shadow and I could further it, obviously unconsciously, and it wasn't helping. And I'm not saying this is porn's fault, and we'll get to that towards the end as I talk more about what do I think about porn. But it's not porn's fault. Porn was just like the place where I was expressing these unhealthy tendencies. And I think that's important to delineate, because everything is neutral. And yes, there is a dark aspect of the porn industry, abuse, and many people being attracted into it due to traumas and really dark things. But what if there was a conscious porn industry? Would that be acceptable? And I think, do what people do. If there's a healthy and conscious way of expressing things and people feel called to do those acts and other people want to watch those, I'm not saying anything against that. So in looking at it from that lens, I'm not saying porn is right or wrong, not saying moralistic, not saying anything really about it. I was saying that I was using it unhealthily. I had a poor relationship with it. And that relationship with it only became more and more unconscious, desirous, and unhealthy as I got older. And I didn't see how it was affecting my relationships until I stopped it. By stopped it, I do mean I went into complete abstinence of it and into celibacy, but only after I went through the dark part of my darkest spiral. Once again, I did talk about this in other ones, but there were points at which I was masturbating on MDMA for 10 hours, 12 hours. This was a desirous and unhealthy place that I was stuck in because I was not happy. I was depressed. I was alone. I was away for school. And all these things coupled allowed for the perfect space for me to get a glimpse at times of just how unhealthy I was, mentally, emotionally, and physically. And this came to my full awareness, the full light of my awareness, when I had a relationship with a woman that I wanted to cultivate love with, and I wasn't able to express that love. There were many parts of our relationship outside of porn that were also contributing to this, but I knew that there was something unhealthy with the way that my sexual desires took over my mind. So when we did finally depart and took our separate ways, I went into that celibacy I was speaking of. And this helped me to put a stop on the desire program, the regular cycles of having a sexual desire creep up in the body and pursuing it mindlessly, pursuing it in terms of sexual stimulation. And I wanted to heal. I wanted to repair my relationships with women, and I wanted to put to end the pattern wherein most of the people that I was closest to who were women I ended up sleeping with because I wasn't able to control my desires, and then I lost a lot of those women in my life, nearly all of them from those early years. And I wanted to rebuild my relationship with women, not just women I was having sexual desire with, but I realized that there was a larger piece here for me, that I had an unhealthy relationship with the feminine. That relationship had to start with me and me learning to love myself, because much of the reason why the addictive behavior, the unhealthy behavior was manifesting as unhealthy was because of the unmet needs within myself. So it's only an addiction. Addiction is only an addiction when it becomes negative. You can, in some sense, use porn, in some sense, use cocaine, in some sense, use what we might refer to as addictive substances or behaviors, but you can do it in a healthy way, where you can be in right relationship. You can use a substance once and the next day not have a desire program, a habit pattern reaction that clings, that grasps, that builds that attachment. An addiction becomes deleterious when the habit patterns of the mind crave it and they seek it because it wants a sense of wholeness, because it's seeking something outside of itself, because it's not whole inside. So when I finally decided to truly put a stop to the desire program and allow for a period of abstinence, at first, I was able to see just how powerful that desire was on my mind, how obsessive it was. I didn't like how it controlled me. This was a point in my life when I wanted to take control of my destiny, when I was chasing my purpose, my desires. That's one of the reasons why the relationship started to falter, is because I wanted to follow my dreams and passions, and there was something out of alignment with the relationship. So part of what led to the end of that relationship was that pursuit of it, and I started to see what other pieces in my life were out of harmony, which were not allowing me to move forward towards growth. But I received a lot of jewels that I never would have thought I could have received, or that I wasn't aware of until that abstinence period, because I started to see how in some way that desire program, even at a subconscious level, even when I wasn't pursuing sexuality, even when I wasn't thinking sexual thoughts, at a subconscious level, those desires, those unmet needs, filtered into every relationship that I had. Not just ones with women, but most pronounced with ones with women, but also relationships with men. Because as I understand it, there's a hierarchy of choices. You can think of them as relating to the 7 chakras. For a little demo of what that would be like is, these are 7 centers of energy and information, and these are 7 decisions. When we are fully aligned in our decisions, all 7 centers have a kind of harmony, a level of alignment with the highest center. So your lowest center is your first chakra, and when you make decisions from this place, you're making survival-based decisions that have to do with keeping you safe. Your second chakra is about sense pleasure and the pursuit thereof. Your third chakra has to do with your power in the world, your personal ego. Maybe this is the pursuit of money or career. Your fourth chakra has to do with decisions referring to love. Your fifth chakra is about the pursuit of truth, expression, and communication. Your sixth chakra is about the mind, imagination, the unseen realms, and following your path towards your greatest dream vision. The seventh chakra is your relationship to the all and making decisions that are benefiting the all and towards your highest path. If you're making decisions that are fully aligned on all levels, you have a hierarchy of decision making where the higher order goals and decisions are in alignment with, is this serving the all? Is this serving my all? Is this coming from my ego's will or my heart's will? Is this decision in accordance with my highest known vision of what is best for my life that takes into account my highest truth and my gifts? And when we make lower order decisions, they generally gravitate towards the lower 3 chakras: safety, food, sex, power, survival. If we're just making decisions based on that, and those are the cycles we are in, our life has a certain ceiling and we will not reach our potential. We'll continue to make decisions that keep us in those cycles, and there's a kind of trap there because there's no real freedom there. It's self-limiting because all of those pleasures come through the self. The door is the 4th chakra where we move into love, and the bridge is from our heart to the other hearts, and the realization that we are all one heart. So when I was caught too deeply in desire and the pursuit thereof, I was not able to make the higher order decisions that move me forward towards my goals, my dreams, my purpose, my dharma, my dhamma, my Tao. So it was only going through that period of abstinence that those energies could move in a different way. And I freed myself up. How this looks practically is when I would walk into a room, and if there was a beautiful woman, I would most likely want to go and pursue her. Rather than coming into a room and listening to my love, my guidance of who I need to talk to, regardless of how they look, I would choose someone that I would have the opportunity to sleep with because my lower desires were guiding me. It's a whole nother thing to walk into a room and go, what does my heart want? Who can I help with the gifts that I have? How can I just be in my authenticity and allow people to be attracted into my field rather than seeking something outside of myself? So in that period of celibacy, I did a lot of work. The work wasn't complete, but I did a lot of work to stop old patterns. I didn't pull desire from the root at that celibacy period, but I initiated a new way of relating to people in a conscious way. I've had several intimate encounters since then, short relationships, not boyfriend, girlfriend, but intimate encounters with women since becoming conscious in this way. And they've been incredibly healing because they haven't resulted in the tear, the rupture that ultimately leads to me losing them in my life. There's a recognition in those relationships that have happened of a deep connection that is mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual. And in there, there's a higher surrender in knowing a more conscious, a higher degree of communication is involved in that interaction, and it's more beneficial even if it ends. Even if it ends. When there's less entangling of desires and emotions and unmet needs and projections and the stories that go around, there's a much better way of communicating. And it doesn't mean that some of those stories and old wounds and ways in which I wasn't loved as a kid came up in those relationships, but there's a higher degree of consciousness of the process that's unfolding, why it needs to happen. And because both individuals in that encounter are conscious and wanting to hold space for themselves and the other in the best of the way that they know how, there is a kind of graciousness, a kind of awareness that holds a container so that that can come up, so that it can be seen and healed. It's not that it's meant to be a perfect thing, but there is a higher guidance that allows a level of ease and grace in those encounters. So I began to heal that relationship, and I don't want to make this too much just about relationships because this whole podcast is about pornography. That wasn't the end of my pornography. The first word is career, but I don't know if you want to call it a pornography career. So I didn't stop watching porn after that celibacy, but I did stop for quite a while. And I went back. I went back because I kept having the desire to watch porn every once in a while. And this is something I do on my path. I don't repress. I don't want to repress. During my celibacy, I repressed a little in the beginning, but I learned how to sublimate. How to take that energy and shift my awareness into a higher knowing of love, which I was alluding to. So when that desire comes, you can just push it down, which doesn't get rid of it. It'll only cause congestion in the lower centers, which can cause blocks mentally, emotionally, frustrations, as well as just other behaviors and shadows can come out. When we suppress things, it just blocks things up in an ugly way. But what you can do in those situations, and what I did, was to follow my dreams, which is to help people, to be a healer, among many other things. But I couldn't show up in a way where those desires, they just weren't welcome. They weren't conducive. So if I was showing up in an engagement with an individual, male or female, if I was still having those lower order desires and those unmet needs within myself, I wasn't able to show up authentically. Because I was showing up with some agenda or a higher degree of being unwhole within myself, because I wasn't meeting fundamental needs within me. So there's a subconscious pattern of wanting to seek those in other people. There's more like a personal selfish agency of wanting things from people. And you can't truly offer your love and gifts if you are desiring something from that person. And I'm not saying I can perfect that to the highest degree, but it's an ideal I can strive towards, is towards, as best as I can, meeting my needs so that when I'm in service and when I'm out in the world, I can offer things from an authentic place, not wanting to sell them anything, especially as a healer, not thinking anybody needs to be healed and I'm that kind of person who's going to be the Messiah for them. My work is to help to guide people and empower them so that they can make empowered decisions to be their own healer. And that's very important to explore. And it completely sidetracked me, so pardon me if I jump away from the point I was talking about. This is me podcasting after all. Tangents are a thing. So I went back to porn, and I decided to explore it because it kept coming up and I didn't want to repress it. And I shifted away to love enough times that it just kept coming up. So I was like, okay, I got to go there. How can I do this in a conscious way? So now this was different. This was not the unconscious pattern of there's a desire in my body and I just unconsciously follow it. There's a larger process here. So I was like, okay, let's try it. Let's watch some porn. And what I realized is I like certain things, and that's fine. For years, I wanted to know why I was attracted to certain types of women, whether this was just conditioning and programming, and some of it was. But then I did realize that I'm attracted to some people more than others. And if I really get down to it, I'm only attracted to very few people. The more I kind of become really clear within myself. So this was a benefit of porn. It was helping me to see what is available and then offer me preference. I used to think preference is bad, like I should be able to just love everyone equally, but that's from my personal preference state, that's just not true. There are some people I'm more attracted to, and this helps me to be honest with myself and be honest with what turns me on. Because I don't want to make this whole podcast just ripping on porn as if it had no benefit in my life. As I came back to it, I was like, wow, this helped me to fantasize. Everything's got a dark and a light shadow, but we're talking about the positive here. And I drew in many beautiful fantasies that I did explore with women. And this opened up my imagination. It's like reading a bunch of stories and then writing your own. Now, the dark side was that it just wasn't very effective anymore. It was very exciting the very first time. I got a lot of arousal from it, but it wasn't engaging. And it didn't seem conductive to my mind because I'd reach a certain level of equanimity, of contentment within myself. And once a strong desire program of seeking outside of the self was initiated, it didn't feel healthy because it wasn't fulfilling that need. And I couldn't develop, because I did try it a few times, a conscious way of relating. I'm not saying it's not possible, but I didn't find a way to do that. Like, if you have a repeated behavior, we talked about this in the beginning, and you're repeatedly doing it, and it's becoming like a craving, an addiction, you're seeking something outside of yourself, and it's not fulfilling, it's going to become an addiction. But there are some things that we seek continually that are desires that do fulfill needs, like food. You can eat food every day. Most people do. And you probably crave and have desire for food. But there's a difference in right relationship and healthy attachment. And there's a way to make that a conscious process rather than an unconscious one that leads towards fulfillment. Like gratitude. Giving some gratitude before you eat and after you eat. And enjoying the food that you eat mindfully. Now, I could bring in some of these ceremonial aspects and consciousness around masturbation with pornography, and I tried to integrate them, but I quickly found that it just didn't satisfy. It wasn't a very centrally satisfying or stimulating scenario. Those are both not the best words, but they're the words that came out of my mouth. So what I'm getting at here is that, like in the way of Tantra, we want to make our sensual experience one that's fully engaging of the five senses and stimulating for the mind and the body, and deeply satisfying, deeply nourishing, cultivating of energy, cultivating of love, cultivating of our gifts and our potential, defining our edge as a masculine or a feminine. There's many things that it can offer. I didn't find sitting next to a computer and becoming quite disembodied to be a very satisfying and empowering action. And I can't think of a single time in my life when I'm consciously prepared a sexual environment, such as a bedroom, for lovemaking where I included a TV on. Because a TV for me is not something I engage with often in my life because it brings me into disembodiment. It brings me very much into my visual sense and into my mind, but not so much into my body and the felt sense experience of the sensations on my skin and what it is to be a human at the deepest level is not engaged very effectively. So my move away from porn was not so much moralistic at this point, but it was that it was just not satisfying to my sexual standards. It was not producing something that allowed me to grow in terms of sensuality or sexuality. And how you practice is how you perform. I didn't find it helpful in the cultivation. Like the cultivation I'm referring to here is like self-pleasure is a way of practicing your lovemaking when you're on your own, so that when you're with somebody, you know what you like and you can control your member, etc. A lot of times the habit reaction, at least for me, I can't speak for men because I don't know their patterns deeply, is there's like a lot of desire and a lot of the act is very disembodied, and it's kind of like a very quick show, if you will. Even as I became, at this point, I was not ejaculating much, but it's a quick show towards like going 0 to 100, wanting to go to full stimulation without like properly massaging the body or touching the body anywhere other than the genitals, stimulating the glands, rubbing the body, massaging the body. Once the body cultivates energy that can be moved through the whole system for many benefits. So the act of using a computer and becoming disembodied into those mind programs, of course you don't have to do it, but that's what I always found myself defaulting into. Even when I tried to move more consciously into this act, I found it very difficult. It was like the energy was working against me. And then I started to see what it was doing to my mind, because at this point I was meditating a lot more. And it was harder to have an equanimous mind, because an equanimous mind, for a metaphor here, is like having a computer with no tabs open. No programs running in the background. There's a certain period in the meditation in the beginning where you clear the mind, where the thoughts, the worries, your day-to-day, that stuff comes through the screen of the mind, and then that settles. But if there's a lot of desire and stimulation, there's a lot more to settle, and it's a lot harder to have peace of mind. Because peace of mind only truly comes when we have peace of mind. No desire programs that are initiated first in the mind. That's important. Desire programs are initiated first in the mind, then in the habit patterns of the body. So I started to really become aware of the effects of watching so much porn and the stimulation of seeing all these images and what it did to confuse me. Because at this time I was beginning to think about what it would be like to be married. What kind of wife would I like? What kind of children would I like? And barraging my mind with all these women, and then confusing my body and my mind by pleasuring myself in an undedicated way without any love, is poor subconscious programming. I operate from a place then, and learning more and more about how to work with the subconscious to manifest, to bring to me what I believe in, because our life is consciously or unconsciously being created in each and every moment. So the more consciousness and intention we have towards our goals, and the more steadiness in our mind to lock onto them and to keep steady with them, will allow us to be on the path towards achieving those goals. If I'm constantly desiring this woman and that woman with no real intention of pursuing them or real intention of actually coming into anything other than what's happening right now of just masturbating them to me on a computer, it's so unsatisfying. Where's that going? So that was one of the reasons why I stopped. At that point, it was like, this is just mentally draining. And then I went through a process of trying to determine what right relationship would be. And there's more parts of this healing maybe we should talk about. One was I did a long Ho'oponopono session on mushrooms where I started, this happened intuitively. I didn't direct my mind there with any intention. It came up in the session to apologize, to say the Ho'oponopono prayer, which is, I'm sorry, I ask for your forgiveness, I thank you, and I love you. And I started repeating that, and I started to think about a lot of the people I had pleasured myself to. And as mentioned in the beginning, a lot of the porn industry is not so healthy. And as I became more aware, in my experience, I began to pick up and sense that it's like when you know people well, when you can read them, you can see things in their body and energy. And it became quite obvious that a lot of the people I had pleasured myself to weren't happy. They weren't doing what they do because they loved. And there was often signs that they were traumatized, or they were not expressing and not actually wanting to be there, or they weren't even in their bodies necessarily. You know, you can tell this in many ways. I can't really give you anything too concrete, but you got to see it to know it, and you'll know it when you see it. There's a certain like dullness in people's eyes when a lot of their soul and a lot of their free choice is not in their body. There's like a dulling of authentic expression, and people move in a different way. They react, they express in a different way. It might be a subtle closing of the throat, it might be a change in the breathing. If you know how to pick these things up, you can see that. And I began to feel into these spaces, and I didn't want to be a part of it. Once again, there is, I'm sure, conscious sexuality and conscious porn out there. But I began to tune into all the darkness that is in that industry and why many people are called to it. And I wanted to, in a sense, clear my field and come into right relationship within myself so that I could have a better point at which I could make a decision as to whether this was benefiting me and as to whether I want to support the industry. Because if I'm spending my energy and time on there, I'm supporting the industry in some way. And there might be positives and negatives in the industry. I don't want to paint a completely black picture, but do I want to invest my life energy on that? And my determination was no. And when I came to that conclusion, and I say really a lot, and I know that's not a very descriptive word that really that expresses the proper depth that I want to. I've come from a background of writing, and expressing with my words is something I'm still learning to do in the ways that conveys what's coming out. And when I went into that place, I pulled a root there. I pulled at the root of desire, and I don't desire porn anymore. And to me, that's the sign that that's a completion of that cycle. I think about it like there's people who give up alcohol, and they might be 12 years sober, but they're like, I can't have a drop of alcohol. If I do, I'll just go in a downward spiral. To me, they haven't got at the root yet. When we get at the root, you could have a sip and you could let it go. Just like I could watch porn and go, no, that's not for me. And there's something different. That's when we get at that deeper mental program, that habit patterning. And in order for me to get there, and it's different for every person, we have to understand what the beliefs are around there. And where did that pattern come from, and how is it serving or not serving? And I determined that it's not serving me. And my new initiated program is don't desire things you don't want to the best of your abilities. And this for me goes to, I went through a whole process, and I'm still going through this process and determining what the highest path is. I'm a single person, and if I want to pleasure myself, I don't feel well to think about people. Because if I'm thinking about someone outside of myself, who am I going to think about? Who am I? Not whom. Actually, I don't know. Who am I going to think about? Do I just think about somebody I saw on the street? Well, do they want that in their field? Do I want to desire off of them if I know I'll never meet them? For me, I don't want that in my subconscious. Say it's somebody I know. Well, do I want to pleasure myself to them? It's like the highest spiritual standard, everyone knows everything and everyone can hear your thoughts. Is that okay? And it wasn't okay for me to do that. So I was like, maybe it feels good just to pleasure yourself to people who there's a known mutual attraction for. And so I've slimmed it right down, right? And I'm like, well, do you want to be in relationship with these people? And then I have to make a determination if I do or if I don't. Because if I don't, and then I have a desire program, there's a little confusion there, right? I'm putting a lot of things in my subconscious. I'm imprinting that person in some way in my mind at a very deep level. Do I really want to put that into my cells? So I have to make that determination, and I'm very conscious about that. I'm very conscious about any time that I extend my sexual energy anywhere, anytime, in all my interactions. This is especially important in the work that I do, that there is a capacity, like a solid capacity to not bring any of that energy into any healing session. And there's a very specific protocol in Qigong that we go over for all of our breath work and our healing that sets the intention, and we basically scan through the body, through the organs, through the skin, and we develop our intention so it's embodied on all levels so that we can find our center in that. So we're not acting from the place of personality, but the energy of the session and the way that I'm showing up is to be a channel for something other than me. So it's not my person holding space. So my personal desires, everything is put aside. There's a bracketing, not a suppression. And in that way, I can show up in neutrality, which is what I need to do to properly hold space for somebody. If I have any agenda as a healer or a space holder, I'm not going to be able to hold proper space for them to go through what they're going through. And then I can't show up at my highest. It's important for me to show up in this way because though I'm not always in that archetype, in that role as a healer, just as a conscious person in conscious community and the way that I live, that energy is not needed. That's one of the most beautiful things that I learned in the multiple terms of celibacy that I have, is that even if there's no sexual thought, if desire is running as a program, as I discussed in the beginning, there's some tilting of consciousness. It's like the glands and the testosterone and what's being produced down there. It throws the whole chemistry in the body off so that the higher levels of intuition and guidance are skewed in some way. The mind is distorted, you could say, from the clarity of pure neutrality and walking through the world in equanimity, which leads to a whole different path of surrender. This is the spiritual path that I'm familiar with, in the ways that I'm walking in, at least. So it's still an exploration for me in what is conscious sexuality and right relationship, and how to pleasure and be a quote-unquote spiritual person. It's very important of a conversation now because it's so prevalent, consciously and unconsciously, this energy. And until it's like it's part of our shadow, right? Until we deal with this part of our shadow, it might not be affecting us in a pronounced way, but if it's not dealt with, it's in the shadow. And when the time comes, and the time will come, it will come out. The light of your awareness in a circumstance or something will come up in which those energies will be active, and you'll have an opportunity to see those patterns. So I don't know how to do this work without celibacy. So my recommendation is celibacy for a period. I don't know what that period looks like for you. In my Qigong program, there's certain periods of celibacy. In my ayahuasca apprenticing, there's celibacy. I did a self-initiated celibacy. In the spiritual work that I do, if I'm ever leading, guiding a ceremony of any kind, like a lodge or a breath circle, celibacy is important, especially being out of relationship. Maybe when I'm in relationship, there would be something different, but the abstinence of sexual desire in any form is really important to setting that standard. So as a conclusion here, this is nothing against pornography. Once again, if there's a conscious way to do pornography and the people involved are not doing it from a place of wounding, sure. I just don't want to partake because it's not satisfying. It's not satisfying. It's just like, why don't watch movies? And now, there are times when I watch movies, but they're with people and there's more to that environment. I don't watch movies on my own because it's just not satisfying. There's a whole world out there which is much more stimulating for my senses and for bringing out my potential. So I have nothing wrong with pornography in that sense. Of course, the darkness of the porn industry and what is on there is a whole nother question. But just as, an exploration here, there's not really anything I have against the act of watching two people make love, But I don't want that in my mind. All those images. I don't want to initiate those desire programs of seeking outside of myself. I would like to build and continue to cultivate a relationship with my own body where I don't need external stimulation to receive pleasure. Because that's a very deeply ingrained habit pattern. And I know many women, I haven't met any guys who do it this way, but I haven't talked to that many guys about this, to be honest. Not in the hundreds. I haven't met too many men, but I met women who self-stimulate and they don't use any pleasure. When I first learned this, I was like, yes. That's what I'm learning about in Tantra. I didn't know people actually did that without a lot of training. And some people are just like that. But most of the men I knew grew up at a very young age with sexual stimulation outside of the self. And once again, this is like a whole thing. Not once again, I don't think I've discussed this, but this is a whole thing. Is first, seek within. Find what you're looking for within, whether that's satisfaction of releasing pleasures or emotions or expressions within yourself, and then use what is outside of yourself, so then it doesn't become a crutch. If you seek outside of yourself first without seeking within and satisfying your needs yourself, it creates dependency, and it's a lot more on the path of leading towards an addiction. So go through that period. Maybe that's abstinence, maybe that's celibacy, but learn to meet your own needs. And then, if we are talking about the whole sexual act here, if pornography is preparation in some ways, and I do think all our self-pleasure on our own practices can be used as preparation for our union with another person, it's good practice. It's good practice to be able to meet our own needs so that you can show up and not need to have your needs met, because it's a whole nother energy when you're actually satisfied with what you can offer yourself, and you can actually offer yourself in service of another person, and your love has a whole different quality there. So ultimately, the self-pleasure is not just about the pleasure, it's about deeper needs. And when we fulfill those needs for love and connection, we find that the desires which might be so tempting at one point in our life aren't so tempting. And this goes for addictions of all kinds. Gym addictions, drug addictions, porn addictions. When the deepest parts of you are met, you are living your gifts, your dreams, you have family and community, you have love, then you won't have those. And that feels like a good place to end this episode. If you are looking to navigate your relationship with pornography, consider what your relationship is. Are you in right relationship? Harmonious relationship? Is it serving you? Be very aware. Make it a conscious process. I'm not saying just to simply push it out, repress it, and that's only going to lead towards a pole shift and a swing, often leading towards a period of abstinence and then a deepening back into desire. Get to the root of it. What beliefs and patterns have evolved around this? And do you want to continue to work with those? Is there a way to make your pornography use or your sexuality, your self-pleasure more effective? Work on it. Optimize your self-pleasure routines with some sexual kung fu, Taoist lovemaking, or tantric practices, and still see if the old patterns are meeting it. Sometimes simply by moving forward and optimizing what we're doing will allow us just to move forward, because it's a habit pattern, it's a cycle that gives us something. The question is it giving us what we need? Is it actually fulfilling? And if it is, then you are fulfilled. And there should be no question here. But if you are not fulfilled, this area is calling out. So the decisions are there to choose love, to choose the highest path, or to choose desire, lower desires. Remember, when we're fully online, we can still make choices that lead to desires. At least in the path that I follow. I do not follow a path of abstinence and brahmacharya in the complete sense of never. I go through periods of fasting, periods of celibacy, so that there's a on-off, so there's a recognition of what is and what isn't. And through this polarity, I can really understand myself, and I can have a lot more control and surrender in a relationship. This is really key, our relationship with desire, relationship with the ego, with power, with sense pleasure. A healthy, balanced relationship. Thank you for listening. Aya Om.